In 1997, the Detroit municipal pension system had $3.8 billion in assets to cover $3.2 billion in promised benefits. The system was 118% funded, safer than actuarial standards required. By 2013, the same pension system had $3.5 billion in liabilities, but only $2.0 billion in assets. The collapse happened during peacetime, with no war, hyperinflation, or revolution. Detroit simply made promises it couldn't keep, invested poorly, and faced demographic reality. When the city declared bankruptcy in 2013, retirees received 16 cents on the dollar for their pension claims. A police officer who retired with a $36,000 annual pension received $5,760. 40 years of contributions vanished. The pattern isn't unique to Detroit. France, Argentina, Greece, and Illinois followed identical trajectories. The mathematics of unfunded pension liabilities guarantees collapse. The only variable is timing. Government pension systems operate on a fundamental promise. Workers contribute during employment, governments invest the funds, and retirees receive payments for life. The system requires three conditions to remain solvent: sufficient worker-to-retiree ratios, prudent investment returns, and honest accounting. The first modern pension collapse occurred in France after World War I. The French government had promised military pensions to veterans and widows. In 1914, France had 40 million citizens and expected to pay pensions to perhaps 200,000 veterans. The war killed 1.4 million Frenchmen and wounded 4.3 million more. By 1918, France owed pensions to 3 million veterans, 600,000 widows, and 750,000 orphans, 4.35 million beneficiaries instead of the projected 200,000. The mathematics became impossible. France's economy had shrunk 30% during the war, while pension obligations increased 2,000%. The government faced a choice: raise taxes dramatically, cut pension benefits, or inflate the currency to reduce the real value of payments. France chose inflation. The franc lost 80% of its purchasing power between 1919 and 1926. Pensioners received their promised payments in nominal terms, but the money bought 1/5 of what it purchased in 1914. A veteran's pension of 1,000 francs monthly in 1914 became worthless by 1926 when 1,000 francs barely bought groceries. The mechanism reveals how governments destroy pension promises without technically breaking them. Nominal payments continue, but currency debasement makes those payments worthless. Retirees receive every franc promised, but starve because francs buy nothing. The legal obligation is fulfilled while the moral promise evaporates. Germany's Weimar Republic followed the same pattern with more extreme results. Pre-war German pensions promised middle-class retirees comfortable retirement. By 1923, hyperinflation had reduced those pensions to nothing. A retired civil servant who had earned 10,000 marks annually received a pension worth 10 trillion marks by November 1923, enough to buy a loaf of bread. The Great Depression demonstrated pension system vulnerability, even in stable democracies. American corporate pension plans collapsed as companies faced bankruptcy. Workers who had contributed for decades received nothing when their employers failed. Government programs didn't yet exist. Social Security wasn't created until 1935, leaving private pensions as the only retirement security. The Soviet Union's pension collapse provides the clearest historical case study of total system failure. Soviet pensions promised workers guaranteed retirement income based on years of service and final salary. The system functioned from 1956 to 1991 through direct government payments funded by economic output. When the Soviet economy collapsed in 1991, pension payments continued in rubles, but the ruble became worthless. A Soviet engineer who retired in 1985 with a pension of 120 rubles monthly, sufficient for comfortable living under central planning, received 600 rubles monthly by 1992 after inflation adjustments. The problem: 600 rubles bought less than 120 rubles purchased in 1985. But here's what most people miss. The payments never stopped. The Russian government continued depositing rubles into pension accounts. The nominal amounts even increased to account for inflation. The legal obligation was met. The practical reality was destitution. Elderly Russians who had worked 40 years in factories, schools, and government offices couldn't afford food with their pension payments. The human cost reveals the pattern. Retired professors sold books on street corners. Former military officers drove unlicensed taxis. Doctors worked as janitors. Engineers repaired appliances in underground markets. Fast forward to Argentina. The Argentine pension system functioned adequately from 1950 to 1980 under various government structures. The system was pay-as-you-go. Current workers funded current retirees, with demographic ratios favoring sustainability. In 1980, Argentina had 5.2 workers per retiree. By 2000, the ratio had fallen to 3.1 workers per retiree. The demographic shift made the system mathematically unsustainable. The government responded by raising contribution rates from 11% in 1980 to 27% by 2000. Higher taxes on workers slowed economic growth, reducing the tax base further. The death spiral accelerated. Fewer workers, higher tax rates, slower growth, even fewer workers. By 2001, Argentina faced complete economic collapse. The government froze pension payments in December 2001. Retirees received no money for 3 months. When payments resumed in March 2002, the peso had devalued 75% against the dollar. A pension worth $1,000 in December 2001 paid out 250 pesos in March 2002, worth $250 after devaluation. The cut wasn't announced as a reduction, it happened through currency collapse. The pattern across France, Germany, Soviet Russia, and Argentina shows identical mechanics. Governments promise pensions based on optimistic assumptions, strong economic growth, favorable demographics, and prudent management. When reality diverges from assumptions through war, depression, demographic collapse, or mismanagement, governments face an impossible choice. Explicit default means announcing benefit cuts. Retirees riot. Politicians lose elections. The option is politically unacceptable. Implicit default through inflation allows governments to maintain the fiction of meeting obligations while destroying purchasing power. Greece demonstrated the pattern in slow motion during the 2000s. Greek government pensions promised replacement rates of 95%. Retirees received 95% of their final salary. The system was unsustainable, with only 2.1 workers per retiree by 2010. Greece's debt crisis forced austerity measures. Pension cuts totaled 40% between 2010 and 2015. A Greek teacher who retired in 2009 with a pension of €2,000 monthly received €1,200 by 2015. The reduction wasn't gradual, it came in sharp cuts imposed by creditors demanding fiscal responsibility. Greek retirees faced a choice between accepting cuts or watching the entire system collapse. They accepted cuts. Many still faced poverty. Detroit's 2013 bankruptcy revealed that American municipal pensions face identical mathematics. Detroit had promised pensions based on 8% annual investment returns. The actual returns averaged 4.5% over 20 years. The gap between assumed returns and actual returns created a $3.5 billion unfunded liability. The bankruptcy court ruled that pensions were unsecured debts, equivalent to bonds. Detroit had $18 billion in total debt, but only $2 billion in assets. Every creditor took losses. Police officers, firefighters, and municipal workers who had contributed to pensions for 30 to 40 years received devastating cuts. A firefighter expecting a $40,000 annual pension received $25,000. A city clerk expecting $18,000 received $9,000. But here's what most people miss. Detroit's collapse wasn't unique. Illinois, New Jersey, Connecticut, Kentucky, and California face similar unfunded liabilities totaling $1.4 trillion nationally. The mathematics guarantee that some pensions will face Detroit-style cuts. The question is, which ones and when? Historical pension collapses reveal 4 strategies that preserved retirement security when government systems failed. First, alternative asset ownership independent of pension promises. French veterans who owned farmland survived pension devaluation because land produced food regardless of franc purchasing power. Soviet retirees with dachas grew vegetables when pension rubles bought nothing. Argentine pensioners with rental properties collected rent in dollars after peso devaluation. The pattern shows tangible assets preserve value when pension promises evaporate. A French veteran who had purchased 10 hectares of farmland in 1914 for 15,000 francs faced destitution if he relied only on his military pension by 1926. The pension's purchasing power had declined 80%, but the farmland still produced wheat, vegetables, and livestock. The land's value had actually increased in real terms because food prices rose faster than general inflation. Second, foreign currency diversification protected against single currency pension collapse. Soviet citizens who held dollars, German marks, or Swiss francs maintained purchasing power when ruble pensions became worthless. Argentine retirees with dollar bank accounts in Uruguay avoided peso devaluation. The challenge was legal restrictions. Soviet law prohibited foreign currency ownership, making dollar savings illegal and dangerous. Argentine currency controls limited foreign account access. The families who violated currency restrictions and maintained foreign assets survived. Those who followed the law and trusted government promises lost everything. Third, continued income through skills or businesses eliminated pension dependency. Retirees who maintained consulting practices, small businesses, or rental income faced no crisis when pensions failed. A Soviet engineer who retired from state employment but continued private consulting work earned hard currency when ruble pensions collapsed. A Greek accountant who maintained a small practice reduced pension dependency and weathered benefit cuts. The distinction between pension-dependent retirement and income-generating retirement determined survival. Pension-dependent retirees faced poverty when systems failed. Income-generating retirees adapted by working longer or expanding activities. Fourth, family networks and intergenerational support systems protected elderly when pension payments failed. Soviet families with working children shared resources across generations. Adult children supported aging parents when pensions bought nothing. Extended family structures in Argentina and Greece provided safety nets when government systems collapsed. The pattern shows nuclear family structures with pension-dependent elderly face catastrophic risk. Multi-generational households with resource sharing survive pension collapse better than isolated retirees. The social structure matters as much as the financial structure. What failed reveals the inverse lesson. Pension-exclusive retirement planning created total vulnerability. French veterans with no assets beyond pension promises faced starvation. Soviet retirees who had saved in rubles lost everything. Detroit pensioners with no income beyond municipal payments faced poverty. Government bonds purchased as pension supplements failed because governments defaulted on bonds when they couldn't fund pensions. Argentine government bonds collapsed alongside peso pensions. Greek bonds faced restructuring when pension cuts arrived. The correlation between pension failure and bond default meant diversification within government instruments provided no protection. American public pension systems face $1.4 trillion in unfunded liabilities using official accounting. Using private sector accounting standards that discount liabilities at risk-free rates rather than assumed return rates, the unfunded liability exceeds $5 trillion. The gap between promised benefits and available assets mirrors Detroit's position in 2005, 8 years before bankruptcy. Illinois state pensions are 39% funded. New Jersey pensions are 36% funded. Connecticut pensions are 46% funded. Kentucky pensions are 41% funded. These funding ratios match or exceed Detroit's 57% funding ratio when it declared bankruptcy. But here's what most people miss. The demographic trends guarantee deterioration. The worker-to-retiree ratio in public pensions averages 1.9 workers per retiree currently, down from 5.2 in 1960. The ratio continues declining as baby boomers retire and birth rates fall. By 2035, projections show 1.3 workers per retiree in many state systems. The Social Security system faces identical mathematics. In 1945, Social Security had 42 workers per beneficiary. By 1960, the ratio had fallen to 5.1 workers per beneficiary. Currently, the ratio stands at 2.7 workers per beneficiary. The Social Security Trust Fund reserves will be exhausted by 2033 according to official projections. After 2033, incoming payroll taxes will cover only 79% of promised benefits. The pattern matches every historical pension collapse. Optimistic assumptions during good times create promises that demographic and economic reality cannot support. Modern application of historical lessons. Eliminate pension-exclusive retirement planning. The risk that government pensions face cuts, delays, or devaluation through inflation is substantial enough to warrant alternative income sources. Diversification across assets, currencies, and income streams provides redundancy that pension concentration cannot match. Tangible asset ownership. Rental property, farmland, businesses creates value independent of pension promises. Foreign currency exposure through international investments protects against domestic currency debasement. Skills that generate consulting income or part-time work eliminate complete pension dependency. Multi-generational planning that includes family support structures provides backup when government systems fail. The timeline remains uncertain, but the direction is determined by mathematics. Unfunded liabilities grow faster than tax revenue. Demographics worsen as populations age. Investment returns fall short of assumptions. The gap between promises and resources guarantees that some pensions will fail. Positioning for that failure now, before crisis forces desperate measures, separates those who preserve retirement security from those who lose everything to government default. 4 strategies survived every historical pension collapse: alternative asset ownership, foreign currency diversification, continued income generation, and family support networks. The pattern shows pension-exclusive retirement planning creates catastrophic vulnerability when systems fail. Demographic mathematics and unfunded liabilities guarantee American pension systems face Detroit-style cuts within the next 10 to 15 years. The next video examines which specific states and municipalities face the highest pension collapse risk, the warning signs that indicate imminent failure, and the timeline for resolution. The analysis reveals which geographic areas to avoid and which maintain fiscal stability. Subscribe to understand the system instead of just participating in it. Pension promises sound secure until demographics and mathematics make them impossible to fulfill. History shows governments choose to destroy pension purchasing power through inflation rather than explicitly default. The difference between preservation and poverty is recognizing the pattern before collapse becomes obvious. History has the answers. The question is whether enough people are willing to look before their retirement security vanishes.